Greetings, everyone. Lee back again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. We're going to keep on keeping on with this making up for lost time here, with the Arthas story. On our last episode, we basically saw the missions unfold where Sylvanas is kind of harrying Arthas as he makes his way through the forest, through the elf gates. And she tries to get runners through and stuff like that. So stay a while and listen to Chapter 19 as we continue that campaign. We're still not finished through the Undead campaign. The traitor, a wizard by the name of Darkandra, should have made it easy. And to some extent he had, of course. Arthas would otherwise never have known about the Key of the Three Moons, a magical item that had been split into 3 separate moon crystals stashed in heavily guarded hidden locations throughout Quel'Thalas. Each temple was constructed on an intersection of ley lines, similar to the Sunwell itself. The traitor herself had told him, gleeful to be betraying his people so. The ley lines were like blood vessels of the earth, carrying magic instead of scarlet fluid. Thus interconnected, the crystals created a field of energy known as Bandinoriel, the gatekeeper. All he needed to do was find these sites at Antelas, Andarath, and Anowin, slay the guards, and find the moon crystals. But the excessively pretty, surprisingly tough elves presented a challenge. Arthas sat astride Invincible, idly fingering Frostmourne, and reflected on how it was that so fragile-seeming a race could stand up to his army. For army, now it truly was. Many hundreds of soldiers, all already dead, and so more difficult to permanently dispatch. The Ranger General's clever little trick of blowing up the bridge had indeed cost Arthas precious time. The river ran through Quel'Thalas until it bumped up against several foothills to the east. Foothills that posed the same challenge to the mobility of his engines of war that the water did. It had taken a while, but eventually they had crossed the river. As he pondered the solution, something had twinged at the back of his mind, a tingling sensation he couldn't quite figure out. Annoyed, he dismissed the strange sensation and instructed several of his unfailingly loyal soldiers to create their own bridge, a bridge made of rotting flesh. Dozens of them waded into the river and simply lay there, forming layer upon layer of corpses, until there were enough of them that the meat wagons, catapults, and trebuchets could make their lurching way across. Some of the undead, of course, were no longer of use, their bodies too broken or torn to hold cohesion. These Arthas almost gently released from his control, granting them true death. Besides, their bodies would foul the purity of the river. It was an additional weapon. He, of course, could and did cross easily. Invincible plunged without hesitation into the water, and Arthas was abruptly reminded of the horse's fatal jump in the middle of winter, slipping on the icy rocks as he leaped, utterly obedient to the will of his master, then as now. The memory crashed on him unexpectedly, and for a moment he couldn't breathe as pain and guilt washed over him. It was gone as quickly as it had come. Everything was better now. He was no longer an emotionally shattered child, racked by guilt and shame, sobbing in the snow as he lifted his sword to pierce the heart of a loyal friend. No, nor was Invincible a mere living creature to be harmed by such a thing. They were both more powerful now. Stronger. Invincible would exist forever, serving his master as he had always done. He would not know thirst or pain or hunger or exhaustion, and he, Arthas, would take what he wished when he wished it. There was no more silent disapproval from his father, no more scolding from the too pious Uther, no more dubious glances from Jaina, her brow furrowed in that dearly familiar expression of Jaina. Arthas shook his head sharply. Jaina had had her chance to join with him. She had refused, denied him, although she had sworn she would never do so. He owed her nothing. Only the Lich King commanded him now. The mental shift calmed him, and Arthas smiled and patted the jutting vertebrae of the undead beast, who tossed his bony head in response. Surely it was the beautiful and willful Ranger General who had unsettled him and made him question even momentarily the wisdom of his path. She too had had her chance. Arthas had come for a purpose, and that purpose had been to obliterate Quel'Thalas and its populace. Had they not resisted him, he would have let them be. Her sharp tongue and defiant behavior had brought her people's doom upon them, not he. The water seeped into the joints of his armor, and the breeches, shirt, and gambeson he wore beneath the metal plate grew wet and cold. Arthas did not feel it. A moment later, Invincible surged forward, clambering out onto the opposite bank. The last of the meat wagons rumbled onto the bank as well, and what corpses were sufficiently intact slogged onto land. The rest lay where they had fallen, the once crystal clear water flowing over and around them. "Onward," the Death Knight said. The Rangers had retreated to Fairbreeze village. Once the shock had passed, the citizens did everything they could, from tending the wounded to offering what weapons and skills they had. Sylvanas ordered those who could not fight to head to Silvermoon as quickly as possible. "Take nothing," she said as a woman nodded and hurried to ascend the ramp to an upper area. "But our rooms upstairs have—" Sylvanas whirled, her eyes flaring. "Do you not yet understand? The dead are marching upon us. They do not tire, they do not slow, and they take our fallen and add them to their ranks. We have delayed them little more. Take your family and go." The woman seemed taken aback by the Ranger General's response, but obeyed, wasting only a few moments rounding up her family before hastening down the road to the capital. Arthas would not be stopped for long. Sylvanas cast a sweeping appraising glance over the wounded. None of them could stay here. They too would need to be evacuated to Silvermoon. As for those who were still hale, few though they were, she would need to ask yet more from them, perhaps everything they had. They, like she, had sworn to defend their people. Now was the day of reckoning. There was a spire close by between Elrondar and Silvermoon. Somehow she felt certain Arthas would find a way to cross and continue his march, continue to wound the land with the purplish black scar. The spire would be a good place to mount a defense. The ramps were narrow, preventing the crush of undead that had been so disastrous previously. There were several stories to the building, all open to the air. She and her archers could do a great deal of damage before they were. Sylvanas Windrunner, Ranger General of Silvermoon, took a calming breath, dashed water on her heated face, drank a deep draught of the soothing liquid, and rose to prepare the uninjured and walking wounded for what would no doubt be their final battle. They were almost too late. Even as the Rangers marched on the spire that would be their bastion, the air, once so sweet and fresh, was tainted with the sickly odor of putrefaction. Overhead, mounted archers hovered on their dragon hawks. The great creatures, golden and scarlet, stretched their serpentine heads against the reins unhappily. They too scented death, and it disturbed them. Never had the beautiful beasts been pressed into such a ghastly service. One of the riders signaled Sylvanas, and she signaled back. "The undead have been sighted," she told her troops calmly. They nodded. "Positions! Hurry!" Like a well-oiled gnomish machine, they obeyed. The Dragonhawk riders surged south toward the approaching enemy. A unit of archers and hand-to-hand fighters hurried forward as well, the first line of defense. Her finest archers raced up the curving ramps of the spire. The rest spread out at the base of the structure. They did not have long to wait. If she had harbored any faint hope that somehow the numbers of the enemy might have suffered from the delay, it was dashed like fine crystal falling to a stone floor. She could glimpse the hideous vanguard now, rotting undead, followed by skeletons and huge abominations whose 3 arms each carried massive weapons. Above them flew the stone-like creatures, wheeling like buzzards. They are breaking through. How strange the mind was, Sylvanas thought with a trace of macabre humor. Now, as the hour of her death doubtless approached, an ancient song played in her head, one she and her siblings had loved to sing when the world was right and they were all together, Illyria, Varisa, and their youngest brother Lirath, at twilight, when soft lavender shadows spread their gentle cloaks, and the sweet scent of the ocean and flowers wafted across the land. Anarala belori, quelderai, shindu falana, by the light of the sun, high elves, our enemies, are breaking through. Now she's used this song in both things. I wonder if she wrote it or if it's from something. Without her realizing it at first, her hand fluttered upward to close on the necklace she wore about her slender throat. It had been a gift from her oldest sister Illyria, delivered not by Illyria herself, but in her stead by one of her lieutenants, Verana. Illyria was gone, vanished through the dark portal, in an attempt to stop the Horde from visiting their atrocities again on Azeroth and on other worlds as well. She had never returned. She had melted down a necklace given to her by their parents and made individual necklaces out of the 3 stones for each of the Windrunner sisters. Sylvanas' was a sapphire. She knew the inscription by heart. To Sylvanas, love always, Illyria. She waited, grasping the necklace, feeling the connection with her dead sister had always provided, then slowly forced her hand away. Sylvanas took a deep breath and shouted, "Attack! For Quel'Thalas!" Yeah, but her sister's not truly dead. There would be no stopping them. In truth, she did not expect to stop them. From the expressions on the grim, bloodied faces around her, Sylvanas realized her rangers knew this as well as she. Sweat dewed her face. Her muscles screamed with exhaustion, and still Sylvanas Windrunner fought. She fired, knocking and releasing and knocking again so swiftly that her hands were almost a blur. When the swarm of corpses and monsters came too close for arrows, she flung her bow away and seized her short sword and dagger. She whirled and turned and stabbed, crying out incoherently as she battled. Another one fell, its head toppling from its shoulders to be trampled, bursting open like a melon beneath the feet of one of its own. 2 more monstrosities surged forward to take its place. Still, Sylvanas fought like one of the savage lynxes of Eversong Woods, channeling her pain and outrage into violence. She would take as many with her as she could before she fell. They are breaking through. They pressed in, close, the reek of decay almost overwhelming her. Too many of them now. Sylvanas did not slow. She would fight until they had utterly destroyed her, until the press of corpses suddenly was gone. They stepped back and stood still. Gasping for breath, Sylvanas looked down the hill. He was there, waiting on his undead steed. The wind played with his long white hair as he regarded her intently. She straightened, wiping blood and sweat from her face. A paladin he had been once. Her sister had loved one such as him. Suddenly Sylvanas was fiercely glad that Illyria was dead, could not see this, could not see what a former champion of the light was doing to everything the Windrunners loved and cherished. Arthas lifted the glowing rune blade in a formal gesture. "I salute your bravery, elf, but the chase is over." Oddly, he sounded like he meant the compliment. Sylvanas swallowed, her mouth was dry as bone. She tightened her grip on her weapons. "Then I'll make my stand here, butcher. Anora la Belore." His grey lips twitched. "As you will, Ranger General." He did not even bother to dismount. Instead, the skeletal steed whinnied and galloped straight toward her. Arthas gripped the reins with his left hand, his right drawing back the massive sword. Sylvanas sobbed once. No cry of fear or regret came from those lips, only a short, harsh sob of impotent anger, of hatred, of righteous fury that she was not able to stop them, not even when she had given all she could, not even with her life's blood. "Illyria, sister, I come." She met the deadly blade head-on, striking it with her own weapons, which shattered upon impact. And then the rune blade itself had pierced her. Cold. So cold it was, slicing through her as if it was made of ice itself. Arthas leaned into her, his gaze locked with hers. Sylvanas coughed, fine droplets of blood spattering his bone-pale face. Was it her imagination? Or was there a hint of regret on his still fine features? He tugged back his weapon and she fell, blood gushing out of her. Sylvanas shivered on the cold stone floor, the movement causing agony to rip through her. One hand fluttered foolishly to the gaping wound in her abdomen as if her hands could close on it and stop the flood. "Finish it," she whispered. "I deserve a clean death." His voice floated to her from somewhere as her eyes closed. "After all you've put me through, woman, the last thing I'll give you is the peace of death." Fear spiked in her for a heartbeat, then faded as everything else was beginning to. He would raise her as one of those grotesque, shambling things. "No," she murmured, her voice sounding as if it came from a long way off. "You wouldn't dare." And then it went away. It all went away. The coldness, the stench, the searing pain. It was soft and warm and dark and calm and comforting, and Sylvanas permitted herself to sink into the welcoming darkness. At last she could rest, could lay down the arms she had borne for so long in service to her people. And then agony shot through her, agony such as she had never known. And Sylvanas suddenly knew that no physical pain she had ever endured could hold a pale candle to this torment. This was an agony of the spirit, of her soul leaving her lifeless form and being trapped, of a ripping, tearing, yanking back from that warm sanctuary of silence and stillness. The violence of the act added to the exquisite torment, and Sylvanas felt a scream welling up, forcing its way from deep inside, past lips that somehow she knew were no longer physical, a deep, keening wail of a suffering that was not hers alone, that froze blood and stopped hearts. The blackness faded from her vision, but colors did not return. She did not need reds or blues or yellows to see him, though, her tormentor. He was white and gray and black, even in a world with color. The rune blade that had taken her life had taken and consumed her soul, glittered and gleamed, and Arthas's free hand was lifted in a beckoning gesture as he ripped her from the soothing embrace of death. "Banshee," he told her, "thus I have made you. You can give voice to your pain, Sylvanas. I will give you that much. It is more than the others get, and in so doing, you shall cause pain to others. So now you, troublesome ranger, shall serve." Terrified beyond reason, Sylvanas hovered over her bloodied, broken corpse, gazing into her own staring eyes, then back at Arthas. "Now," she said, her voice hollow and eerie, yet still recognizably hers, "I will never serve you, butcher." He gestured. It was the merest thing, a twitch of a gauntleted finger. Her back arched in agony, and another scream was torn from her, and she realized with a racking, raging sense of grief that she was utterly powerless before him. She was his tool, as the rotting corpses and the pale, reeking abominations were his tools. "Your rangers serve as well," he said. "They are now in my army." He hesitated, and there was genuine regret in his voice when he said, "It did not have to be this way. Know that your fate, theirs and that of your people, rests upon your choices. But I must press on to the Sunwell, and you will assist me." The hate grew inside Sylvanas like a living thing in her incorporeal body. She floated beside him, his shiny new toy, her body gathered up and flung on one of the meat wagons to who knew what sick end Arthas could devise. As if there was a thread that bound her to him, she never was more than a few feet away from the Death Knight. And she was beginning to hear the whispers. At first, Sylvanas wondered if she was insane in this new abhorrent incarnation, but it soon became apparent that even the refuge of the mad was denied her. The voice in her mind was unintelligible at first, and in her wretched state she did not wish to hear, but soon she understood to whom it belonged. Arthas kept giving her sidelong glances as he continued his inexorable march to Silvermoon and beyond, watching her closely. At one point, as this army of which she was a captive part surged forward, destroying the land as it passed, she heard it very clearly. "For my glory you will serve, Sylvanas. For the dead you will toil. For obedience you will hunger. Arthas is the first and most beloved of my death knights. He will command you forever, and you will find it joyous." Arthas saw her shiver, and he smiled. If she had thought she had despised him when she first beheld him outside the gate of Quel'Thalas, when the wondrous land within was still clean and pure and had not known the killing touch, if she had thought she hated him as his minions slew her people and raised them to become lifeless puppets, and when he impaled her in a single savage blow with the monstrous rune blade, it was as nothing to what she felt now, a candle to a sun, a whisper to a banshee's scream. "Never," she told the voice in her head. "He directs my actions, but Arthas cannot break my will." The only answer was hollow, cold laughter. On they pushed, past Fairbreeze village and the East Sanctum. At the gates of Silvermoon itself, they halted. Arthas's voice should not have carried as it did, but Sylvanas knew that it was heard in every corner of the city as he stood in front of the gates. "Citizens of Silvermoon, I have now given you ample opportunities to surrender, but you have stubbornly refused. Know that today your entire race and your ancient heritage will end. Death itself has come to claim the high home of the elves." She, Ranger General Sylvanas Windrunner, was paraded in front of her people as an example of what would happen to them if they did not surrender. And they did not. And she loved them fiercely for it, even as she was pressed into service by her dark master. And so it fell, the shining, beautiful city of magic, its glories shattered and reduced to rubble as the army of undead, the Scourge, she heard Arthas call them, twisted affection in his voice, pressed on. As he had before, Arthas raised the fallen to serve, as if Sylvanas had still possessed a heart. And if she had, it would have broken at the sight of so many friends and loved ones shambling beside her, mindlessly obedient. On through the city they marched, cleaving it in twain with the vile purple-black scar, its citizens lurching to their feet with wounds that had smashed skulls, or trailing viscera behind them as they shambled forward. She had hoped the channel between Silvermoon and Quel'Thanas would prove an impassable barrier, and for a moment that hope seemed realized. Arthas drew rein, staring at the blue water glinting in the sun, and frowned. For a moment he sat atop his unnatural steed, his white brows knitted together. "You cannot fill this channel with corpses, Arthas," Sylvanas had gloated. "Not even the whole city would be enough. You're stopped here, and your failure is sweet." And then the being who had once been human, who had once, by all accounts, been a good man, turned and grinned at her blistering words of defiance, sending her into a paroxysm of agony and wrenching another soul-splitting scream from her incorporeal lips. He had found a solution. He cast Frostmourne toward the shore, watching it almost rapturously as it flipped end over end to land with its tip impaled in the sand. "Frostmourne speaks." Sylvanas heard it too, the voice of the Lich King emanating from the unholy weapon as before her shocked gaze. The water lapping at its rune-inscribed blade began to turn to ice, ice that his weapons and his warriors could cross. He took her life, he took her beloved Quel'Thalas and Silvermoon, then he took her king before the final violation. They had rested on Quel'Thanas, they had resisted with all they had in them. When Anastarion appeared before Arthas, his fiery magics wreaked havoc on the Death Knight's icy bridge, but Arthas recovered. He frowned, his eyes flashing, drew Frostmourne, and bore down upon the Elven King. Even as she hoped desperately that Anastarion would defeat Arthas, Sylvanas knew he would not. 3 millennia rested upon those shoulders. The white hue of hair that fell almost to his feet was due to age, not dark magics. He had been a powerful fighter once and was still a powerful mage, but to her new spectral sight there was a frailty about him she had not seen when she breathed. Still he stood, his ancient weapon Phalomalorn, flame strike in one hand, a staff with a powerful glittering crystal in the other. Arthas struck, but Anastarion was no longer standing in front of the charging steed. Somehow, faster than Sylvanas could see, he was kneeling, swinging Phalomalorn in a clean horizontal strike across the horse's forelegs, severing both of them. The horse shrieked and fell, its rider with it. "Invincible!" Arthas cried, seeming stricken as the undead horse rolled and tried to get to its feet, while missing its 2 forelegs. It seemed an odd battle cry to Sylvanas, considering Anastarion had just gained an advantage, but the face Arthas turned toward the Elven King was full of naked rage and pain. He looked almost human now, a human male seeing something he loved in torment. He scrambled to his feet, glancing back distractedly at the horse, and for a wild moment Sylvanas thought maybe, just maybe, the ancient elven weapon was no match for the rune blade, as Sylvanas knew it could not be. It snapped as the blades clashed, the severed piece whirling away crazily as Anastarion fell, his soul ripped from him and consumed by the glowing Frostmourne, as had been so many others. He sprawled on the ice, limp, blood pooling beneath him, white hair spread out like a shroud, while Arthas rushed to the undead horse and mended its severed legs, patting the bones while it pranced and nuzzled at him. And Sylvanas, although she knew it would harm those she still loved, could not carry the weight of the pain and anguish and sheer burning hatred of Arthas and all he had done. Her head fell back, her arms spreading as her mouth opened, and a cry, beautiful and terrible at once, was torn from an insubstantial throat. She had cried out before, as he had tortured her, but that was only her own pain, her own despair. This was so much more. Torment, agony, yes, but more than that. A hatred so profound as to be almost pure. She heard other cries of pain mingling with hers, saw elves dropping to their knees, clutching ears that began to bleed. Their voices and their spells were stopped, changed from words of magic to incoherent cries of raw grief and startled pain. Some of them fell, their armor shattering and breaking off them in jagged shards, their very bones breaking beneath their flesh. Even Arthas stared at her for a moment, his white brows drawn together in an appraising gesture. She wanted to stop. She wanted to silence herself, muffle this cry of destruction that only served he whom she hated so passionately. At last it wore down beneath her pain, and Sylvanas, banshee, fell sickly silent. "What a fine weapon you are indeed," Arthas murmured, "and mayhap you will be a double-edged sword. I will be watching you." The horrible army pressed on. Arthas reached the plateau. He reached it and slew those who guarded the Sunwell, and forced her to participate in the slaughter. And then he visited the ultimate horror upon her people, marching up to the glorious pool of radiance that had sustained the Quel'Drai for millennia. Beside it, waiting for him, stood a figure Sylvanas recognized, Darkhan Drathir. So it had been he who had betrayed Quel'Thalas, he who even more than Arthas had the blood of thousands upon his well-manicured hands. Fury raged through her. She watched the glow she knew to be golden play upon Arthas's features, softening them and lending them an artificial warmth. Then he upended the contents of an exquisitely crafted urn into the waters, and the radiance changed, began to pulse and swirl, and inside the swirling center of the damaged magical glow, a shadow. Even after all she had witnessed this dark day, even after what she had become, Sylvanas was stunned at what emerged from the befouled Sunwell, rising and lifting its arms to the skies. A skeleton, horned and grinning, its eye sockets burning with fire. Chains snaked around it, and purple vestments fluttered with its movements. "I am reborn, as promised. The Lich King has granted me eternal life." It had all been for this? To raise this single entity? All the slaughter, the torment, the terror, the unspeakably precious and vital Sunwell corrupted? A way of life that had lasted for thousands of years shattered for this? She stared sickly at the cackling Lich, and the only thing that gave her even a hint of surcease from the agony was watching Darkhan, who had attempted to betray his master as he had betrayed his people, dying as she had done from Frostmourn's keen edge. Okay, so we've replayed this now from another angle, and I think we're gonna, I don't know. We've seen that happen now in a multitude of ways. We've read it in Chronicles, we've seen it in the game, we've seen it in the blood of the Highborn. And now this is a fourth version. I think that's maybe gonna be the last time we see that version, maybe not. But for now, this episode is in the pipe 5x5. Thanks, everyone, so much for watching and for listening. And I will see you next time on Lore